October 17, 1957, Millbrook, Ohio. Benjamin Garrison adjusted his glasses as he stepped out of the Millbrook post office. At 42, he'd spent nearly half his life sorting mail in this sleepy town of 6,000 souls. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves as he crossed the street, nodding at Sheriff Dalton, who was sipping coffee outside the diner. "Morning, Ben. Letters running late again." "Just the usual government inefficiency," Ben replied with a practiced smile. "Washington can't even get the mail moving on time." Ben was a fixture in Millbrook, beloved for organizing the annual Memorial Day Parade and coaching Little League. His wife Margaret had passed 5 years earlier from polio, leaving him to raise their son alone. Folks admired how he'd persevered, maintaining his community involvement despite his grief. What they didn't know was that Benjamin Garrison had been born Boris Garlikov in Leningrad, and that for 13 years, he'd been reporting on the nearby Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to his handlers in Moscow. The yellowed photograph in his wallet showed a different life. A young Soviet naval officer with serious eyes, standing beside his commanding officer. That man had recruited him in 1944, identifying his facility with English and his unremarkable features as perfect for deep cover work. After intensive training, Boris had been inserted through Canada in 1944 with expertly forged documents identifying him as Benjamin Garrison, a Minnesota native whose records had been conveniently destroyed in a courthouse fire. Ben unlocked his modest home on Elm Street and immediately noticed something was wrong. The porcelain dog figurine on his mantel, his daily security check, had been moved an inch to the left. Someone had been inside. His pulse quickened as he methodically checked each room, finding nothing else disturbed. In the basement, behind the water heater, his shortwave radio remained untouched. He sat at his kitchen table, hands steady despite his racing thoughts. 13 years without incident. 13 years of sending coded messages about aircraft prototypes, personnel rotations, and security protocols gleaned from loose-lipped airmen who stopped for beers at Donovan's bar where he worked evenings. His position at the post office gave him access to military mail and local correspondence, providing critical insights into community sentiments during nuclear drills and moments of Cold War tension. The telephone rang, startling him. "Hello, Ben, it's Alice. I need to speak with you urgently about Tommy's science project." It was Alice Zimmerman, the new 5th-grade teacher who'd arrived in town last semester. The words "science project" were not in their established recognition code, but something in her voice, a tightness, made him pause. "Of course, Miss Zimmerman. Would you like to come by after school? Actually, could we meet at Stillwater Creek, near the old bridge? In 30 minutes." Ben replaced the receiver, his mind calculating possibilities. Alice had approached him 3 months ago at a school function, eventually revealing herself as his new contact after his previous handler disappeared. He'd been suspicious, protocol-dictated notification through established channels, but she'd known all the verification codes. At Stillwater Creek, Alice was already waiting, her blue dress bright against the autumn foliage. At 34, she carried herself with the confident posture of someone with military training despite her cover as a small-town teacher. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "We've been compromised," she said without preamble. "Someone sent a letter to the FBI field office in Cincinnati. They're investigating you." "What letter? Who sent it?" "Unknown. Contained specific details about your activities. Dates, times. The writer claims to have proof you're communicating with Moscow." Ben felt ice in his veins. "Could be a crank. We've had false alarms before. This is different." The letter mentioned specifics about the B-58 Hustler bomber tests. Information only someone with access to your reports would know. She handed him a cigarette pack. "Microfilm inside. New identity, travel route to Mexico, then to Cuba. You leave tonight. He pocketed the cigarettes. What about you? I have other assignments. She wouldn't meet his eyes. The center thinks there may be a mole in our American network. Until they identify the source, all agents with possible exposure are being recalled or reassigned. That evening, Ben sat at his kitchen table, staring at his son's school portrait. Tommy was 13 now, excelling in mathematics and baseball, proudly American in every way. The boy had no idea his father was a Soviet spy or that his mother had never existed. She was a fabrication for his cover, allegedly dying when Tommy was too young to remember. The Westinghouse refrigerator hummed in the background, a symbol of the American prosperity he reported on while secretly resenting. Yet over the years something had shifted. He'd found himself genuinely enjoying the Memorial Day parades, the baseball games, the Christmas caroling. He'd developed real friendships. His ideological fervor had gradually been replaced by comfortable routine and community connection. Ben removed the false bottom from his desk drawer and retrieved his one-time pad for decoding the microfilm Alice had given him. As he worked through the ciphers by lamplight, a hollow feeling spread in his chest. Extraction meant abandoning Tommy, leaving without explanation. The boy would be devastated, possibly placed in state care when authorities discovered his father's true identity. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Through the peephole, he saw Richard Tate, the high school principal and his closest friend in Millbrook. Ben quickly hid the espionage materials and opened the door. "Rich, what brings you by so late?" Richard's face was grave. "Can I come in, Ben? There's something we need to discuss." They sat in the living room, the ticking grandfather clock marking the uncomfortable silence. "I know, Ben," Richard finally said. "I know who you really are." Ben's hand inched toward the drawer where he kept his Makarov pistol. "I'm not sure what you mean." Richard placed an envelope on the coffee table. "I wrote to the FBI last week. I didn't want to, but I had no choice. The betrayal was physically painful. We've been friends for 10 years. Which is why this is so difficult." Richard's voice cracked. 3 months ago, I was in your basement looking for the pickleball set for the church picnic. I found your radio. At first, I thought it was just a ham radio hobby you hadn't mentioned. But then what? Ben's mind raced through contingencies. The extraction route, the weapon in the drawer, the neighbor who might hear a gunshot. I came back when you were at work. I saw the code books, the camera. Richard looked down. I should have reported you immediately, but I couldn't reconcile the Ben I knew with what I'd found. I watched you for weeks, hoping there was some explanation. Ben remained silent, evaluating options. Last month, I followed you to Cincinnati. I saw you meet with that teacher, Miss Zimmerman. The way you exchanged packages. It was like something from a spy novel. Richard's eyes were pleading. The FBI interviewed me yesterday. They're coming for you tomorrow morning. The clock chimed 9. Tommy would be home from his friend's house in an hour. Why are you telling me this? Why warn me? Richard's face showed genuine anguish. Because of Tommy. He's innocent in all this. And because despite whatever else you are, you've been good for this town. That wasn't all an act, was it? The question hit Ben like a physical blow. He thought of the genuine pride he'd felt watching Tommy hit his first home run, the real tears he'd shed at veterans' funerals, the authentic connections he'd made. No, he admitted. Not all of it. Then take tonight. Get your affairs in order. But Ben, Boris, whoever you are, don't take Tommy. He deserves a chance at a normal American life. After Richard left, Ben moved with mechanical efficiency, burning documents in the fireplace, packing essentials, preparing for extraction. The coded instructions detailed a rendezvous point in Cincinnati, then a series of safe houses leading to Mexico. When Tommy came home, cheeks flushed from the cold, Ben embraced him tightly. "Everything okay, Dad?" Tommy asked, pulling away with the adolescent awkwardness of a boy beginning to define himself as separate from his father. "Just glad to see you, sport." Ben ruffled his hair. "How about some hot chocolate?" They sat at the kitchen table, Tommy chattering about his friend's new telescope and their plans to observe the Sputnik satellite that the Soviets had launched earlier that month. The irony wasn't lost on Ben. "Dad, can we get a telescope too? Billy's dad says the Russians can probably see right into our backyards from that thing. Do you think that's true?" Ben smiled sadly. "No, Tommy. Sputnik is just collecting scientific data. But it is an impressive achievement. Mr. Wilson says it means the Reds are ahead of us now. That it's dangerous." Ben studied his son's face. The earnest blue eyes, the cowlick that wouldn't stay flat, the spattering of freckles across his nose. What would this boy think when he discovered the truth about his father? "Sometimes the world is more complicated than it seems," Ben said carefully. "Not everything is as simple as us versus them." After Tommy went to bed, Ben sat in the darkness of his living room, the extraction package open before him. The microfilm contained detailed instructions, emergency contacts, recognition signals, everything needed to escape the FBI and return to Soviet control. On the mantelpiece sat photographs of his American life. Tommy's first day of school, fishing trips, the two of them building the backyard treehouse. Beside his chair lay an unfinished model airplane they were building together. A half-completed permission slip for a school field trip sat on the side table, requiring his signature. At midnight, Ben made his decision. He drove to the outskirts of town, to the old Millbrook Bridge spanning the river that separated the town from the county highway. The night was clear, stars spread across the Ohio sky. He removed the shortwave radio from his trunk and dropped it into the dark water below, watching the ripples spread and disappear. Next went his Soviet documentation, his coding materials, the microfilm with his escape route. One by one, the physical connections to his former life disappeared beneath the water. The only thing he kept was a small photograph of his parents in Leningrad, which he couldn't bear to part with. When he returned home, he wrote 2 letters. The first was to Tommy, to be opened when he was 18, explaining everything. His real identity, his reasons for coming to America, and most importantly, how his love for his son had never been part of any deception. The second was addressed to J. Edgar Hoover, director of the FBI. At 6:15 the next morning, 4 black sedans pulled up outside the Garrison home on Elm Street. 8 FBI agents approached with weapons drawn, positioned at exits, prepared for resistance. Special Agent Frank Miller knocked firmly on the front door. It opened immediately. Benjamin Garrison stood before them in his Postal Service uniform, ready for work. "Benjamin Garrison? I have a warrant for your arrest on suspicion of espionage against the United States," Agent Miller declared. "I've been expecting you," Ben replied calmly. "Tommy is still asleep. May I leave a note for Mrs. Peterson next door to watch him?" The agents exchanged confused glances. This was not how Soviet illegals typically responded to arrest. In the Cincinnati FBI field office, Ben sat across from Agent Miller and his partner in a sparse interrogation room. "Mr. Garrison, or should I say Comrade Garlikov, we have substantial evidence of your espionage activities spanning over a decade," Miller began, placing photographs on the table. "You meeting with known KGB operatives. Your radio transmission schedule. Details about the information you've passed regarding Wright-Patterson Air Force Base." Ben nodded. "I won't waste your time with denials, but I would like you to read this." He slid across the table the sealed letter he'd written to Hoover. Miller opened it cautiously, then read aloud. "Director Hoover, I, Boris Nikolaevich Garlikov, formerly of the Soviet Naval Intelligence, hereby offer my full cooperation with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I am prepared to reveal the complete Soviet espionage network in the Midwest, including dead-drop locations, communication protocols, and the identities of at least 7 agents currently operating under deep cover. In exchange, I ask only that my son Thomas, who knows nothing of my activities and is an innocent American citizen, be spared public humiliation and allowed to continue his life with minimal disruption. I accept whatever punishment the American justice system deems appropriate for my crimes. Miller looked up, suspicious. Why should we believe you're suddenly willing to betray your comrades? Because I realized something that took me 13 years to understand, Ben replied quietly. I came to America as an enemy, but somewhere along the way it became my home. My son is an American. And so, I realize now am I. The debriefing lasted months. Ben provided detailed information that led to the identification and arrest of Soviet operatives throughout the American Midwest. The KGB issued a death warrant for his betrayal. Alice Zimmerman disappeared before she could be apprehended, presumably recalled to Moscow. In a classified agreement with the Justice Department, Boris Garlikov pleaded guilty to espionage in a closed-door proceeding. In exchange for his cooperation, he received a 25-year sentence instead of execution, and the government agreed to keep his case sealed to protect his son from public scrutiny. Tommy was told his father had been involved in a classified government matter and had to go away. Richard Tate and his wife became the boy's guardians, raising him alongside their own children. The town of Millbrook was fed a cover story about Ben taking a position with the Postal Service in Alaska. On May 17, 1972, after serving 15 years of his sentence, Boris Garlikov, known to the prison staff as Prisoner 471826, died of lung cancer in the medical ward of Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary. His final visitor had been a young man of 28, now a mathematics teacher in Cincinnati, who sat by his bedside for 3 hours, holding the hand of the father who had chosen him over ideology and country. 3 months after his death, a letter arrived for Thomas Garrison, postmarked from Washington, D.C., containing his father's personal effects, a watch, a wallet, and a faded photograph of a young Soviet naval officer standing beside his commanding officer. Paperclipped to the back was a newer photo, Benjamin and Tommy Garrison at a baseball game, both smiling broadly into the camera. On the back, in careful handwriting, were the words, "This was never a lie." The Millbrook post office installed a small plaque honoring their longtime employee Benjamin Garrison, remembering him for his community service and dedication to the town. Only a handful of people ever knew the full truth about the quiet postman who had made the most American of choices, placing family above all else. In 1995, when the Soviet archives were briefly opened following the collapse of the USSR, a historian researching Cold War espionage discovered a KGB file labeled Operation Lighthouse. Inside was a single photograph of Benjamin Garrison coaching Little League, taken from a distance. Scrawled across it in Russian was a single word, traitor. Beneath it lay the photocopy of a handwritten letter that had exposed a Soviet spy in small-town America, changing forever the course of one man's double life.